everyone. I'd like to welcome Shalini to our very first LinkedIn Live. We've decided on calling this Disruptors Live. As a quick background, Shalini has been an engineer by training, followed by a corporate career in her 20s. A series of events then led her into venture capital, which subsequently led her to heading investments for 500 startups in India. 500 Startups, for the uninitiated, is a Silicon Valley-based fund investing in early stage technology startups with, I'm guessing, currently close to about $2 billion under management. Following her time at 500, Shalini flipped over to the other side of the table as a founder with her enterprise called Epic One. Clueless at 30 chronicles her experience as a millennial in India trying to figure it out. Shalini, it's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you, Raj. Thank you for the wonderful introduction. And I think I really need to be thankful also because you were one of the first supporters who bought the book and first reader as well. So I'm very excited to have this
Oh,
conversation with you.
always. Oh, that's too kind of you to say. You know what? What got me about the book in the first go was the title. It's not just that it was so catchy, but it's just that it appeals to such a huge segment of the society, right? At this point. So my first question
Yeah.
is more out of curiosity at this point. Did you first write the book and decide this should be the title, or was it the other way around? Hey, I'm Clueless at 30 is the title. Let me build my life story about how I'm going to write it from there on.
So I think it almost happened around the same time, to be honest. Yeah, probably it's also more to do with maybe the title came first because my friend and I were like jamming. We were, he and I were generally talking about books because he was an author before. He has a published book, and my close friend Varun Agarwal, who inspired me and motivated me to write this book, and we were talking, and I was like, oh, I want to talk about all these things, but then you don't have like a central narrative, right? You need like a central
Right.
point with binds all the topics that you want to write and talk about, and then it came out of that conversation. But then, yeah, I knew what I wanted to write, but it was all up in the air. But then I think the common thing that was binding all these things was my current state, and I was thinking it was more like a generic observation, and I didn't realize that I was at the center of all this. so so yeah, it came out through a conversation, and then I think that became like the central point, and only after that I started writing, but then I just had these topics otherwise floating.
Right. What is your initial reaction to actually being offered a book deal, right? Because I would think that being offered a book deal is great on one side, but on another level, you realize that, hey, I have to expose myself on this huge platform, my entire story. Was there fear? Was there excitement? How did you feel about that when you first offered the deal?
I mean, that's a very good question. I mean, initially, when seeking a book deal from any publisher, I think you're largely talking about the construct of the book itself, right? I mean, the topics that you want to
Right.
talk about and so on. You're not necessarily writing the entire book, but then just giving a flow it's going to be about, and what are all the key topics that you're going to cover in the book, right? But initially it was more like, oh, you're just penning down all your thoughts, right? You're penning down everything, and I don't think until super recently, I don't think I ever thought about, oh, what if someone reads this, and what if they have like this image of me and it's going to be like completely new, right? I mean, I never thought of it. I think I started only, I wouldn't say worried, but I started thinking more about it only in the last few weeks, to be honest. When I was writing, I was like very happy, but then I think that the what's very important for any author who's writing a book is to be very honest, and I think an audience actually connects to honesty, the real human or the real you, right? I think that's
Right.
what they connect to. So yeah, I was not afraid to do that. And you and I, just before this live started, you and I talked about getting out of comfort zone, right? I mean, we
Right.
spoke about doing things which, and it's okay if you screw up, or it's okay if you don't be the best version of whatever it is, but then the idea is to get out of that comfort zone and do new things. So,
Right.
and yeah, I think this is my attempt to be the real me, and not having any inhibitions, and talking about topics or matters that really affect me. Yeah, I think there was no inhibition in the beginning to talk about it, but then I really wanted this to be an honest book, so this is my attempt to do so.
Right. When I started reading the book, I got it on a Monday morning, I think, and I was scared for you, right? Because when I started reading it, I was like, okay, what am I going to find out here? But at the same time, there's this feeling of a lot of pride that you were able to put yourself out there, because it takes guts to even do that. And I think the moment I had read the book, I'd said the same thing to you. So I think, and it's a story that everybody needs to hear, not just folks in the venture capital community, even though it's more interesting for us, right? I think you mentioned Varun. The venture
Yeah.
capital community is so small. My time as a banker, I was advising one of his fundraisers for a very short duration.
Okay.
So I was speaking with him. I was connecting him with another potential investor at the time. So it's a very small community, right? So for us, it's particularly more interesting. But there is so much meat to kind of take away for everyone from this book, right? Beginning just with how nice the framework of this is. I really enjoyed the structure of the book, and especially because it's kind of into 4 phases, right? Through which people usually move, and of course, I think putting them in acronyms makes it even more fun. Would you like to walk us through the 4 stages, and how it actually pertains to your life in general?
Yeah, I think I'd like to call this a clueless framework. So let me go 2 steps back first.
Yeah.
So the book actually does not say how can you be not clueless or unclueless, right? I'm not talking
Right.
about that at all, right? I mean that's the whole point, because I think in the beginning itself I have like this disclaimer which says this is not a book about tips. This is not a book about self help and so on, right? It's about what you do when you're in the situation, or how do you care for yourself when you're in the situation. I think that was the central goal of the book. So what the book actually starts with, as you rightly said, there are 4 phases in this book. The first phase is FOMO, which is the fear of missing out. I think most of us go through this in our everyday life. It doesn't matter, it's your 20s, 30s, or 40s. And also, with social media, there are these glorified representations of how people are living this really cool,
Right.
crazy life. And all of us are aspiring to lead that. It could be from fashion to professional accomplishment. There's so much, right? And I think I started the book talking about all the fears that we live with, fears that we have created for ourselves, one through social media, or some with following the blueprint of right, or the idea of even failing itself, right? I mean, if you don't do certain things at a certain age, you're considered a failure. And we have all these idealistic frameworks that we want to live. So I've started off with that, and what it's actually doing. And then um, and as you see, the book is also about me and a few of my friends in college and how we all started off, right? And we arrive at this point where we are like, hey, I did everything right. How can I be in the situation? I'm not supposed to be in the situation. I followed the blueprint
Right.
of life. I did all the right things. I studied hard. I took all the jobs that I was supposed to do. And why should I be in this situation? Right. I mean,
Right.
and that was the turning point for me. That was when we are all inching towards 30, right? And so the idea was also to see with my observations or my work experience and so on, right? I mean, the idea was to really like put yourself out there. There is nothing else that you can do, right? I mean, you're like, I'm not happy, I did all the right things, but I don't know why I feel bottled and stuck. I'm not supposed to. I'm earning good money. I've had a reasonably good career or success so far. So this, I think, moves to the next stage. The next stage is SOBO, which is the search of better options, or better opportunities, where you actually put yourself out there looking for new things. You challenge yourself, and you should be okay to make a mockery of yourself, right? I mean, if something doesn't work
Right.
out, but the idea is to put yourself out there. But then when you put yourself out there, you realize that there are 100 other things that can go wrong, right? And it is a part of the journey, right? Because there are all these other fears that you will encounter. It could be the fear of doing something for the first time, or fear of being judged, or fear of also talking on stage, to like so many things, because now you've put yourself out there. You got to do everything that comes along the way, right? I mean, like, we're doing this thing, when you spoke about getting active on the media front, there's so many fears, right? I mean, what if you say the wrong thing,
Right.
right? So I think, yeah, when you go out looking for new things or get out of your comfort zone, there are new things that's going to encounter. And then, and I'm saying that, hey, you cannot escape this. When you want something better for yourself, you have to do this, or you have to sacrifice, or you have to go through this process, right? When you want something better for yourself. And then I move into the third phase, which is Jolo, which is the joy of letting go, where I'm saying, all these inhibitions that you have, or anything that's holding you back, or anything that is self created in your head, right? Just let all of that go, right? I
Right.
mean, so that you unburden yourself from all these thoughts that's really holding you back. And once you have completely let go, you're free of all these burdens. And the last part, which is my favorite part, because I really live by that even today, is Mofo, which is a move forward. Right? It's about how do you move forward from being in this clueless state and being comfortable with that. Right? I think that is the
Right.
final state. Once you have let go, you're clean, you're unburdened. Now let's keep moving forward. So that's the final part where I talk about multiple things, like how do we be like an unfinished product, how do we be a work in progress, how do we
Right.
experiment new things, how do we think about a micro goal setting. Everybody talks about big goals. How do we talk about micro goals? If you don't know that one thing that you want to do, why should you not have 10 avatars, right? All of us are waiting for a passion or for that sign to come, and then we're not doing anything, and we're so stifled at our workplace or in our everyday life. How do you not wait for all of that and just keep doing 10 things? Because all these 10 things actually come together and give you this unique identity or unique perspective, which I call the identity capital, right? How do you build your capital on
Right.
identity, which solely comes from experiences, and you got to put yourself out there. So that's the final part of the book. Yeah, so that is my long answer into explaining the different phases of the book.
When I was kind of going through this, I was trying to fit in my own life into the different phases, and I realized that oftentimes what happens is that just to recap, right? We have four stages, which is FOMO, fear of missing out; SOBO, which is search of better options; then there's JOLO, which is joy of letting go; and MOFO, which is moving forward, right? All supposed to be stages of progression mentally as well. Do you realize I started thinking about this, and I thought that oftentimes you are switching between one mode or another because you're kind of oscillating between that phase. And I've at least in your 20s, for the longest time, you can feel like you're making progress. So you've gone from FOMO to SOBO, and then you start getting this hedonic adaptation which takes place. Think about it in terms of a job or in terms of entrepreneurship. Once you start getting adapted to that, then you start feeling you're missing out on something else. So you kind of go back a stage. So do you think there's a process to kind of breaking out and not kind of backsliding through those phases?
I think, first of all, the idea is not to say, hey, don't have FOMO, right? I think the
Hmm.
idea is to also accept your anxieties, accept your vulnerabilities, or accept any emotion that is actually holding you back, or making you think twice, or having any self doubt, right? I mean, the idea is
Right.
to accept that you're going through that emotion and just letting it pass. But you have to recognize that emotion, or I recognize
Right.
that fear, right? And not shy away from it, because at the end of the day, we are all humans, right? I mean,
Right.
um, and I think we shouldn't be so hard on ourselves. But the idea is to accept what you're going through, and let it slide. And yeah, and I think the idea is that you should also not let this hold back, right? I mean, you recognize this saying, okay, you're envious of someone, or you want to have that better life, right? I mean, but the
Right.
question always comes to, okay, what is it that you're going to do about it, right? Or I used to say this very often before, is all of us want an extraordinary life, right? We all want great things in life, but to get that extraordinary life, we all need to go that extra mile, right? So how many of us are actually willing to do that? So the idea is, yeah, I mean, You recognize this, and this is what it's going to take to go that extra mile in life, and then you keep pushing forward.
That's a brilliant way to kind of put it together as well. My next segment that we're going to move to is basically my lessons, which I learned from reading the book, and I wanted to get your thoughts on it and just a few questions around those lessons and how you kind of put them in your lens to actually reflect it to everybody else, right? The first one is that millennials have been living in a world of labels, right? I think there's a part of the book where you say that definitions belong to the definers, not the defined, right? What I feel is that chasing labels has often led at least this generation, right, to get again something that you said in the book, which is that I'll be happy when syndrome, right? Because we're all always chasing that next label. How do you feel you were able to break out of this mold, right? FOMO plays a big part in this, right? Because you're chasing something else. So how do you kind of break out of this mold of living outside of labels?
So it's very interesting you're asking this question also, because my mentor and I, we were having this conversation about, we were talking about, I'm an investor, I'm an entrepreneur, I'm an author, I'm a community builder, I'm a sportsman, I'm an artist. I have all these avatars, right? And I said,
Right.
see, this is who I am, right? And he was like, no, I don't think you're any of this. Okay. Because because all these things are not the real person that you are, right? I mean, you could be a dreamer, or you could be someone who's like an enabler of sorts. The core of all these things, there is one value that is very close to you, that is actually driving you to perform or be in a certain way in all these avatars that you have
Right.
chosen. And like, for example, in that definition says, say, if I by heart, if I was a storyteller, right? I mean, then maybe the avatar could have been manifested in different ways, right? It could have manifested as a author, or it could have manifested as like a media company or whatever, right? I mean, at the core, if I'm a storyteller, then it would have manifested in these different ways. So yeah, so answering your question about labels, right? I think we're all chasing these labels which are not potentially the true manifestation of who we are, but we are chasing these labels which make us look cool on our
Right.
LinkedIn profile, or we are doing that, I don't know, to satisfy our own ego, that, oh, we are really important because we have all these 5 labels or 6 labels, right?
Right.
So yeah, but at the same time, having said all of this, one of the reasons why we chase these labels is because I think it's just the human need, to have that sense of identity, right? And I've also always questioned myself and also other people, saying, why do people say mom of 2 or mom of like 3, right? I mean, why is that so important to say that on our social media platforms, right? I mean, why do we? I've seen that like on
Right.
Twitter and you know so, but yeah, I think it is an identity that you most so closely connect with, that you have. But then but it's also closely related to our human need to belong to a tribe, or our need to have a social identity or a connection. So I think that is the reason why we chase labels.
Right.
But in our professional lives, it's not necessary that it is a true manifestation of who we are.
I think that's a good point. Most people aren't even aware that we are chasing after labels, right? There's this. You've heard of Trevor Noah, right? He's a talk show host in the US. So he was interviewing this conservative host, and he asks her that you're a conservative, right? And she's like, I'm a millennial, so I don't like labels, but yeah, I'm a conservative. So he's like, wait a second, you just gave yourself a label to say that you don't like to give yourself labels. So that is just to kind of make you aware that you aren't even aware that even millennial is a label, right? And you kind of live in that mold. So I think that's
Yeah.
that's an interesting way to kind of
Yeah,
look at
it's
this,
like
right?
compartmentalizing yourself, or giving yourself like a definition, right? Like, for example, if I've seen this also, say, if you're applying for, say, an award, right? Like, one of my friends was actually telling me, saying, hey, maybe you should apply for, like, like a women excellence something. This was like 2-3 weeks back, and then she and I were going through these websites, right? For filling these nomination forms. And then we were looking at it. It's also clear, it's so clear, you got to be an entrepreneur at, a digital something, something. And then there's like so clear. And I was like, oh my God, I don't fit into any of this. I don't know who I am. Right. So, it's interesting because, I think the world out there has compartmentalized or boxed in certain way, boxed you like, oh, you're this. If you're not any of this, then you're not good enough. Or so I think that's why we
Right.
chase those boxes or, those tick marks.
Right. I think it's also one of the things which leads to more fear, right? In terms of, I think we'll get to other things like even your ability to take risks, etc. But because of all of the way the construct has become now, because of technology, because of everybody putting their thing out there, because you have to be bucketed in a certain label. If you're not, there's also just fear out of doing new things, right? Which leads me to my next question, which is around basically stigma around being perceived as not smart enough, right? Or which subsequently leads to stigma of failure, which again is a big issue in a society like India's, right? Unlike the Bay Area, wherein founders wear their failures as a badge of honor, that hey, I failed in so startups, which reflects to that society that hey, this person has taken the risk, he's learned, and so on. You also have faced this, right? Through different stages. Even in the book, you kind of detail that every time you were trying to shake off, a previous avatar, go into the new one, there's always this societal pressure that you felt, right? Whether that was when you left your corporate job or left VC. How does someone young actually break free of this societal stigma and in pursuit of higher excellence for themselves?
I think it's definitely better now, Raj. Like say 15 years ago itself, right? I think there was more stigma around failure itself. Like the fact that you didn't do engineering itself, it's like, oh, your child is useless or your child is a
Mhm.
failure, right? Now, there are other arts or anything that you take now. There's so much of scope that I think everybody as a society itself is recognizing it, right? So but yeah, I think in general, I think it's generally been more open as the entrepreneurship or the startup culture is more prevalent now. I think the idea of failure itself is more accepted for sure. But I think fear of failure also sometimes holds you back from starting something at all, right? And I think it goes
Right.
back to what I originally said is what if these failures actually define you as a person. I spoke about all these experiences that you collect that gives you a unique perspective or a unique identity itself, right? How can we have failures define you as a person, because there's so much of learnings that come from it. Those experiences cannot be matched with anything, right? I mean, so if
Right.
you take it along the stride, and also if you think about it's failure or success is not like, success is not the ultimate destination, right? Or you should never treat failure as the opposite of success, right? If
Right.
you just take it as, it's a journey, and you may have ups and you may have downs, and you should never think of this as an ultimate destination in itself. And I think more than anything, if you don't try, you're never going to get what you want. So, if you want something more out of life, and you want to have these identities, and you want to have like these um whatever it is for your business or for profession or for your everyday life, right? I mean, you got to put yourself out there, and you got to do this. Like we were just talking about how I'm trying to learn the ropes of marketing a book, right? We were just
Right.
talking about that, right? And I was just telling you about how I've not been super comfortable with using Facebook or Instagram and whatever. I may not even be doing it the right way, but hey, you got to put yourself out there. I might be miserable
Right.
at it, but you got to do what you got to do. So yeah, I say I wouldn't treat anything as a failure. It is an attempt to make something work. So if you want it to work, you got to do it. There's no other goal.
Right. I think related to stigma of failure is also the ability to take risk, right? Because if you're always scared of failing, you'll not take risks, right? And I think in the world that we operate in now, jobs are constantly changing, disappearing, and all of that. I think taking risk is a prerequisite for success in these times.
Yes and
What?
no. I mean, I mean, it depends. What is that fear of failure, right? I mean, are you talking about quitting your job and doing your own startup kind of risk, or are you talking about only quitting your job, which is like your bread, earning your bread and all that, right?
Right.
I mean, it could be other types of risks that you take. It could, right from starting a cooking blog or whatever, right? Or anything that you do where you're trying to create like something more unique to yourself. So I would say it depends. I mean, are we talking about giving up your livelihood to start something new,
Hmm.
or are we talking about smaller risks, right? I mean, so each of us are made different, and it's okay if you cannot take those big risks. But the
Right.
idea is that you take even that tiny small risk that will help you define yourself better, or you know, get your build your better avatar. So I would say, yeah, but take that risk, even if it's a small
Yeah.
risk.
I
You'll
think
end up in a better place.
that's quite, yeah, I think that's quite eloquently put. The way I can also look at risk, the way I have done it in my life, is that it's also a muscle in a certain sense, right? The more you do it, the more you get used to it.
Yeah.
Second thing is taking the right measured risks in my life have usually left me with a lot of contentment, right? It doesn't make me feel that I haven't done enough because it requires you to put yourself out there. So for me, it's been that. And I think there's a part in the book where you talked about, I think, your career being a crossword puzzle, right? So, and the trick, it's always convoluted, it's always tricky, and you're never sure whether you have all the answers, right? But you've got to take the next step. And the next
Yeah.
step often involves taking that little bit of risk.
There's this saying, right? It says you in your life, in the end, you're probably gonna regret about all the things that you didn't do than the things that you did, right?
Right.
So that's why you got to do everything that that you're curious about or excited about. You just got to do it, because those are the things that you're going to regret the most. So and that's why you should not be afraid of the mistakes or failure. You got to just do
Right.
it, because that's your biggest regret, that you didn't do it when you could have.
Absolutely. And I think you really nicely mentioned that risk is different for different people, right? If I'm sitting comfortably with, a lot of wealth in my bank account, I can take any risk that I want, right? I don't have to fear that my family would go hungry. Whereas it could be
Yeah.
different for someone who's living paycheck to paycheck.
See, when you're talking about a financial risk, right, there are a lot of people who are also worried about reputational risk, right? It's your
Right.
name, right? Like, they'll associate it with
Hmm.
failure. It may not be financial loss, but there's so many types of risks that you need to take. But yeah, but I guess so. You do as much as you can, but the point is that you should do it.
Right. I think I'm going to come to more of the questions that I've seen you answer way too many times, but I will still ask this, right? It's more around women entrepreneurs taking the risk to become more of a part of the workforce, right? What would be your advice to a lot of women who are trying to break into this world, which is predominantly kind of dominated by men, whether that's venture capital or whether that's entrepreneurship? It's increasing, but not nearly as much as you would think, right? I just did some quick research some time back, and I'd read that the percentage of startups in India with a women founder have reduced from 17% to 12% over the last year as well, right? Our workforce participation, as well as India may have been doing, has not been good. India's women contribution to GDP is around 17%, which is half of the world average at 35. Even Bangladesh has a lot of good workforce participation. That's why their GDP per capita has kind of skyrocketed now, right? My question here is that how would you condition those people who feel that the odds are already stacked against them to actually come in and do what things like you did, right? To take that risk. And the second thing is, what does the society need to do to make these people come into the fray a little bit more?
So first of all, in general, I think it is the best time to be a woman right now. Also because it's not just the idea of getting capital or not, but there are also so many people who have already been like trailblazers who set those examples itself, right? And of course, there's so many opportunities there. There are funds dedicated for women. There are a lot of organizations running programs for which are women centric itself, right? I mean, it is that ecosystem has definitely opened up more and more. I think what's important for any woman who's trying to get into entrepreneurship startup or generally make a mark in life, right? I would say the first thing is stop telling yourself that you're a woman, right? I mean, that itself is like a label in itself, right? I think just,
Right.
if you're sitting at a table, if there are like 5 men or 10 men, you shouldn't be thinking, oh, I'm the only woman investor sitting here, right? I mean, the idea is, why are you looking for that extra consideration? You should not be. So I think the idea is to stop telling yourself stories that pull you down, right? I mean, start telling stories that will actually catapult you to the next level, right? And I think there is so much of advantage to being a woman right now, because there is so much of push in general from all places, like from having women led funds, to having women led entrepreneur I mean startups and so on, right? I think it's a good time to be a woman, and don't think of being a woman as like a weakness, or something that is detrimental to your career, or something that is not going to help you leap forward. Because I think there's so many things out there which is very good if you're a woman, actually. So I would say, don't label yourself thinking, oh, I'm a woman entrepreneur and it's going to be tough. You are an entrepreneur first, and then you're a woman entrepreneur. It's important to shift that thinking and shift what you're telling yourself.
That's an excellent answer. My next lesson, which I got from the book, right, and it's something that I've been following because I follow Kunal Shah quite a bit as well, is that inputs before outputs, right? Research before the results. The way I look at this lesson, to a certain extent, is that you cannot have Virat Kohli's attitude without before first developing his work ethic, right? You captured it really well with that Peter Pan reference, which is one of my favorite parts in the book, which says that you can have anything in life as long as you're willing to sacrifice everything else for it, right? So as long as you're putting and taking a very parallel corollary there, right, is that as long as you're working towards it, you will kind of get it there. But in our generation of instant gratification and trying to hack our way to success, uh, people get disappointed really early, and then they quit a little bit earlier than they would have been. What would be your advice to that generation, right? Living in this world of instant gratification, to mentally condition yourself that certain things take time, certain things can be hacked. How do you build framework for yourself so that you can make the best of both of those mindsets?
Sure. I think my book and my thoughts in the book largely represent the question that you've asked itself, right? I used to be a national badminton player, right? And, to even get into a state team, or, even for national team for more people, it takes years. It takes years of hard work, right? And one is hard work. And it also takes oodles of sacrifices, right? And it needs, imagine like you're 11 years old or 12 years old, and the only thing that matters to you then is playing gully cricket, or going to your friends' birthday parties, or going and watching a movie with your friends, or cartoons with your friends, right? These are the most important things for you, right, when you're
Right.
11 or 12, right? I mean, that's what you look forward to. So the idea of giving up something for something better is, at least for me personally, fortunately, I think it was ingrained very, very early on in your life, right? Was I happy doing that as an 11-year-old? Absolutely not, right? But the
Hmm.
success, or the point of giving up those sacrifices, happened only after 3 years. I could see that only after 3 years or 4 years, right? Because you start playing better, because just day and night, all you're doing is, you're in the court. You're in the court morning to night, just playing. You can't do birthday parties, or because next day morning you have to wake up early, or you can't go for the summer vacation just like normal families do for 10 days, because, the tournament season starts in June and you got to start training in April, May for it. And
Right.
so there is so much that you give up as a child, and you're not seeing success immediately. Just because I didn't go for a holiday, that doesn't mean I start winning in June, right? I mean, that's not happening either.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
But then the thing is, you slowly start moving up, right? You see that over a period of time. And I saw that very early on, and I think any sportsman would concur with that, right from their food habits to anything. There's so much of sacrifice that they do to actually become a champion. You may not even at the end of it become a world champion, right? I mean, you may still just become a
Right.
state champion. The amount of sacrifice that you do, the resilience and patience, and hard work that you need to have and to need to develop in that sense. And there is no instant gratification in any sportsman's life. It's years of hard work. And for me, I think that fortunately for me, because I was able to experience this, I think I've been able to sort of implement that in different phases of life, right? I mean, if it was so easy to become successful, or if it was so easy to become like the next big sensation, everybody would have become that, right? And to
Right.
become that next sensation, there is so much of hard work that has gone. There's a journey that you have taken, and sacrifices, and so much that you have given up. And the fact that you also had to get out of your comfort zone to do all of that, I think that is what is going to define your success, right? I mean, everybody looks at these
Mm,
fancy lives. You mentioned Kunal and all these people, right? I mean, they have had their share of learnings, share of disappointments, and
absolutely.
shares of failures. And I think that is what makes them who they are. And obviously it is not something that's happened over 3 years or 4 years, right? I mean, it's happened over years and years. You have to sacrifice your personal life. People lose their relationships, and like money, and there is so much of the financial
Yeah.
comfort and lifestyle comfort that people need to give. Nobody thinks of that when they actually see, oh, this person raised this funding, or they became his unicorn. But there was like a 10-year
Right.
journey, that they had to
Yeah.
take. Yeah, but yeah, I think instant gratification is probably only going to take you so far, is what I would say, to answer your question, because what's going to define you and your success is ultimately the sacrifices that you've made and what you had to give up to come to where you are. And I think it's sweeter that way, because the
Yeah.
value of what you've got.
Yeah, and I think Steve Jobs, somebody had said this, that focus is having to say no to the things that you really want to do, right? If you were saying no to things that you didn't want to do, it would have been very easy. This entire piece around instant gratification and how difficult it has been for people. Actually, newspapers and media has kind of warped that reality a little bit, right? Just I think last week I was having this conversation with my team, and I had spoken with Rajan Bajaj, who's just the founder of Slice, right? So also in 2017, and I had spoken with him, during my time as a banker, and I was sharing this snippet with my team, in which I told him that, hey, we will not be able to take on your mandate because it's we're still waiting for you to kind of grow into that that phase where we can help you out. And I told him that, hey, if you need any help from us, we'll be happy to provide, etc. Right? But I'd just taken that snapshot and sent it to my team that always never forget to account for the tenacity of an entrepreneur, right? And that's because
Yeah.
now we're looking at things from an investment standpoint, right? And through all of this, don't lose your humility, because you don't know where you will end up. You don't know where the other person will end up. So I think this is all of those lessons coming together, because Rajan Bajaj, I've seen him, right? His product was totally different, and then he pivoted. He focused on what he was doing, and now Slice is a unicorn, right? Great. We spoke about your time as a sportsman. We about your struggles there. Talk to us a little bit more about the mentorship aspect, right? Because coming through that phase, mentorship played a big role in your life. I think people don't underscore the importance of mentorship enough, especially in our generation. I think for you, being a sportsman, it would have been a very, you'd have realized it a long time ago that mentorship is important. But how do you go about looking for mentors when you are getting into different phases, different stages of your life, whether that's going from a corporate career to VC to entrepreneurship? How do you go about the process of looking for mentors?
So growing up, of course, you're not really, at least in say 15 years ago, right? I think the idea of having a mentor itself was not a very common thing. And I remember in my cousins would actually ask, who are much older than I am, if I had like a mentor and stuff. I was like, no, why do I need a mentor? I think I'm like totally sorted or whatever, right? I mean, in fact, in my head, at least I used to thought it is for the weak. It is for somebody who's like totally messed up, or who needs like someone sitting around and like another parenting type of a situation, right? I mean, that was the idea that I had. But I think around the age of 28 or so is when I started having this idea of having someone who's vested in your generally well-being, right? I mean, I don't want to say who's vested in your success, but who wants to unleash the real potential in you, right? I mean, that's how I started seeing their role, and I think it is so important, and it's so nice to have somebody who's really vested in bringing out the best version of yourself, or at least attempting to do so. And so I have a theory about this. I can't remember this, but then I think I recently read this saying actually mentors choose you and you don't choose mentors. It is the other
Oh,
way
wow.
around. Yeah. So I
That's a
read this,
really
and
nice, fresh perspective. Yeah.
yeah, so it is because only if I know that I can work with someone and I can help them get from point A to point B, or if I feel like, what, I think I can really extract the real potential in this person by like helping them. It could be professionally, or it could be mentally, or anyway, right? If I know I can do that, only then I can offer to do that. So it is the other way, in fact. So I don't think people choose mentors. I think mentors choose the people that they want to mentor, or they'll choose their mentees. So that's my perspective. So it's the other way around, and I really
Yeah.
really believe that. I can't remember where I read this, but then I really believe that.
That was gold, Shalini. I think I had not thought about it this way. And yeah, I'm already taking away more from this conversation than I did from the book as well. We'll move
I'll
to the
read another
next part. We'll move to the next part, which is more around the importance of mindfulness and how we speak to ourselves. I think you've alluded to this in the book as well, right? And I think you say that we control our narrative, we control our stories, right? Um, how have you worked over the years in terms of how you speak to yourself and how you've been mindful of the steps that you're taking, right? Because when you're trying to do so many things, it's so easy to get distracted. When was it firstly that you learned that, hey, I need to be more mindful, I need to be more focused, and how did that translate into actual steps in your life from that point?
So I'm a generalist by nature, as even as a professional, and as an investor or an entrepreneur, whatever, right? I mean, I've had a super eclectic background where I have not really done one thing for a long period of time, and I don't think that is by design. I think it's just so happened that it is that, right? I think if I find anything very exciting, at the same time very very challenging, where I can see a lot of personal and professional growth, I've just jumped at it without thinking, oh, is this in my line of doing things, or is this my ultimate goal? And the whole point of writing this book also is that I don't know what's my ultimate goal. Right? I mean, that's the
Right.
point. I don't know what is that end thing that I'm trying to get to, right? I am still searching. I searched through my teens or my 20s, and now in my 30s I'm still looking for it. So my mantra has always been that anything where I feel I see great growth, personal and professional, I would just jump on it and do it, right? I would not say no to it and shy away from it if it's not in my path. But then whatever I take, obviously I'm very committed to it, right? I mean, I'm focused, and I'm going to go all in and trying to make the most out of it. But I don't have a set path to say that, hey, I have designed my life to be this way, and I'm doing all the things to in order to get to the end goal, because I don't know what my end goal is. So, and that's
Right.
the point of those.
Right. There's a part in your book where you're talking about this Jim Carrey movie, right? Yes, Man. I felt that whenever I was in an exploratory mode in life, I was saying yes to a lot more things. But when I found what I wanted to do, then it became more about trying to control those indulgences, right? That's when meditation and mindfulness actually came into my life, because it was that,
Yeah.
hey, you've gone through your yes phases. Now you are into a phase wherein you have to focus, right? And I left quite a few things, whether that was on my diet, on my fitness, or meditation. And the way I was saying this to somebody the other day, and I actually wrote it down because that sometimes the thoughts just come to you. It was that the reason I do all of those things and control and say no quite often now is that I feel like the more you are in control of the smaller indulgences in life, the more you feel empowered to control the outcome when the odds are stacked against you, right? Yeah.
that's Jim Carrey reference that I gave in the book is also, I think, in the Sobo stage, the
Right.
part 2 of the book, right? Because I'm saying, hey, when you're out there exploring, when you're searching for things, just be a yes man, right? I mean, just say
Yeah.
yes to everything when you're exploring, because you don't know what you're going to strike, and so don't say no at all. And what's very important, which you rightly put, is, but once you have found that thing, you can't be saying yes to everything, right? You got to go all
Right.
in, and you got to be committed to it and stay dedicated, and to also do anything really good in life. I think discipline is the most important thing. So I think, and also the discipline to say no,
Right.
which will sort of deviate from your path, or from the work or that line that you've picked. So yeah, I completely agree with.
I think I have another thought around that as well, especially when you found what you want to do. You also know what the odds of your success are, right? For example, I think even starting up in India, the statistic is 90% of startups failing, right? Within the first 5 years, I think that is. Even VC success rates in investments are not that high. Most of the investments fail. So when you know these statistics, when you know these odds, the onus is on you to kind of remove the distractions and make sure that you are working towards your competitive advantages, right? And seeing how you can turn those odds, because that in itself is a Herculean task. And if you're always saying yes to everything, you will not be able to kind of look at the nuanced aspects of what it takes to turn the odds in your favor.
So it's very interesting because you brought up meditation, you brought up mindfulness. I don't want to name this person, but one of India's prominent VCs. I remember when I was working on some deal with that person. That person said, "Oh, so we were discussing. There was a deal that I was sharing with him, saying, hey, do you want to co-invest and so on." And he said, yeah. And then the next day in the morning, like first thing in the morning at 7:30, I remember talking to him and him telling me, "Oh, I meditated on this, and I think this is going to be good. Let's do this together." I was like, "Wow!" like uh, especially when you're living in such a data-driven decisions, right? I mean, you're like, "Oh, I'm going to go by data and make this decision," and of course that played a role in it. But it was very interesting that he said that he meditated on this, and
Right.
because it gives you a clarity, or maybe it helps you declutter your thoughts, and have that singular focus on making a decision. So I think different people have different ways which will keep them sane, I suppose.
Yeah, I think it's also about getting that clarity of thought, right?
Yes.
And that some people get it from meditation, some people get it, from working out. Another way which you've also covered in the book is another way to get that clarity of thought is through diverse opinion, right? Which is the entire conversation that we've had in even nowadays, right, around diversity. My question there is that how do you actually expose yourself to that diverse group, right? Especially if you are, let's say, you're not working for a corporate wherein there's enough diversity in terms of female participation or in terms of minorities or whatever that is, right? In that situation, as an individual, what can you do to expose yourself in times like these to diverse opinion to grow yourself?
I think diverse opinion is beyond just the gender lens, right? I think diverse opinion
Yeah.
also comes from the diverse environments that you create for yourself, or diverse set of groups or interests that you create for yourself, right? I think I would say the first thing would be to say if you start volunteering anywhere, right? I mean, depending on the interest group, interest areas that you have, you start volunteering is one, and then sometimes just I mean, depends what you're doing, but then you can also do stuff on the weekends and stuff, right, where you actually put yourself out there, you meet different people. And I think there are also so many meetups that happen now, just
Hmm.
coffee, books or whatever, right? I mean, there's so many such things nowadays, but the idea is, it doesn't matter, even if you don't do it wholeheartedly for like 2 years or 3 years, right? I mean, even if you do it for 2 months or 3 months, the fact that you went there itself gives you an idea, gives you a flavor of what that group is, or how are people of that community, how do they think, what is their perspective, and how do they go on living their lives, right? I mean, you get that insight for 2 3 months itself, right? And I think, yeah, I think just doing those small things is a good start, I would say.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. Uh, I think now, before we get to the final part, I have a few questions from which my team has asked you. Again, I'll keep it fairly quick. One of my colleagues, he asks, it's difficult to find a single guiding force in life. What are the ways to create a guiding system to help us stay centered in our 20s?
So I would say, I because I'm anti everything that this person has asked, right? I mean, see, when you're like, oh, you're looking for that sign and the direction, and and I've struggled finding the direction myself, so I'm in no position, in all honesty, to answer this question. But I would say that anything that looks radically different, I think you should do it. Which is not in your path, I would say do it. I mean, I would say that is my guiding force. Even now, it is my guiding force. If somebody tells me something which has got nothing to do with what I've done or what I've done in the past, I will just jump at it. I think that is my driving force. So yeah. And also, I think whatever sort of is your core values, right? I think if you have at least those values in place, like three things that are really important to you, like for example, enabling people is very important. So in order to enable people, you can actually be a teacher at school, or you can run like a venture factory, to you probably go work in a social enterprise, right? I mean, there's so many ways you can do that, but if at least if you know what are your core values, what are important for you, I would say those are your driving forces. But how it manifests can be completely different, but having those
Right,
core values would be your guiding force.
right. One final question from the team. Okay, it's the fairly simpler one. How do you go about planning in a way that is efficient, that does not lead to either under planning or analysis paralysis? How do you kind of find that balance while you're planning the next stage of your life?
So I've spoke about satisfiers in this book, Raj. I mean, if you remember in part two,
Maximizers
right?
and
This maximize.
satisfiers.
Yeah. So I
Yeah,
would I would really strongly recommend that philosophy, saying, when you're in that situation, just be a satisfier, right? I mean, basically what you're saying is you're constantly always saying, what is the worst that can go wrong, right? If you make this
right,
decision, right? And you weigh that and see, and are you going to be okay with that, right? I mean, if you also think about this topic that I've spoken about, which is mostly fine decisions, right? If you can
right,
marry the yeah, you make a decision, and it doesn't have to be a perfect decision. Is this a mostly fine decision, right? I mean, can you
right.
deal with the consequences of that decision? And if you can live with that consequence, then just jump at it. So there is no analysis paralysis or choice paralysis and all of that, right? Because you're weighing the odds of the worst case scenario, and if you can live with it, just don't overweigh things, be a satisfier, and just jump at it.
All right. I think that that answers the question quite well. We have the final question for you, Shalini. This is basically about your next phase, and I want you to talk us a little bit through what Find Your Slash is. I think the readers will obviously come through what it is, but and I've been to one of the events as well. But talk to us about the next phase and what Find Your Slash will mean to you going forward.
So Find Your Slash is about constantly reinventing yourself in different phases in your life. It is about developing multiple avatars for yourself, because I've been a strong believer of collecting or building identity capital. Be an artist slash blogger slash writer slash technologist slash, like, be any slashes, collect all these slashes, because that's what's going to build that unique identity, right? And if your question is what is my next slash in terms of my career move, no, I've been in my exploratory phase. I've been still working with entrepreneurs, mentoring them or consulting with them, and also with a few funds. And hopefully sometime next year I will be able to unveil a new avatar, but right now it's mostly been exploratory.
I think that's a nice way to kind of wrap all of this up. For me, I think one of the biggest takeaways from Find Your Slash and the entire book was that there is so much value in being multifaceted, in being like a diamond. It has so many different facets. You look at it from different ways, and the onlooker will have a different opinion based on his perspective, right? And given the day and time that we are growing up in, it's so important to have all of that. and it's so beautifully captured in your book. I hope that a lot of people kind of get to read it and get to learn from it. But for now, thank you so much for taking the time. I really appreciate you coming here to talk to the audience, and I hope we can do this more often.
Yeah, thank you so much, Raj. I really enjoyed this. This was my first LinkedIn Live, especially to do with the book. So this is really
Yeah.
exciting, and I really enjoyed our conversations. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Shalini. Take care. Bye.
Bye.